Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and back with another non-Christmas card, even though I'm feeling the crunch to make tons and tons of Christmas cards. However, this is the December release for Waffle Flower, and no Christmas themed anything. And this large stamp from the new Thinking of You stamp set I absolutely fell in love with. And ended up making 3 cards. And I called this 3 levels of card making, going from the most simple, and then I'm just going to show you how to step it up. So very, very basic for this first one. I literally just took a white card base. This is just some heavyweight white cardstock, cut to 4 1/4 by 11 and scored at 5 1/2. And I am stamping the large image as well as one of the sentiments onto it with just clear embossing ink. And I used my anti-static powder tool first, and then I'm using Ranger's liquid platinum embossing powder. Now you could use any embossing powder. Gold would look really nice. That was actually, I literally had gold embossing powder sitting on my desk for this. And then I remembered, I was like, I haven't used liquid platinum in a really long time, and it's so pretty. So this gives a different look though, because liquid platinum on white is very, I don't know, it's different. If you don't have liquid platinum embossing powder, I highly recommend it. It's a very unique sort of a shade, whereas, you know, the basic golds and silvers you can get with like pretty much any brand. But this one it's like a warm silver. It's kind of like, if you like the warm grays of Copic markers, that's basically what this is, with a bit of like a metallic look to it. It's really pretty. So I heat embossed that onto the front of card number 1. And then while I had this in my stamp platform, and I'm literally like standing up and, you know, really pressing good, because this stamp is very large. Like, these are A2 size pieces, so it kind of gives you an idea how big this stamp is. So for my second one, I stamped it again onto the same type of cardstock, but I purposely offset the stamp. You saw me move the paper over. I could have just stamped it centered and then cut it down afterwards, but I have difficulty with that sometimes. So if I stamp it right from the get-go, you know, hanging off the edge of the cardstock, it enables me to kind of, you know, move away from my I like things to be centered and lined up, and my little, you know, twinges of OCD that I deal with at times. So I did that with my second piece, and then I like to do kind of everything at once. So while I had the embossing powder out, I stamped this a third time, but this time onto some watercolor paper. This is Strathmore's Ready Cut watercolor paper. Any watercolor paper would work. And I stamped it twice using the platform before adding the embossing powder, because this does have a bit of texture to it. And again, it's a large stamp. So I find a lot of times that stamping it twice with the clear embossing ink helps get that detail. So after I'd done that, I fiddled around. This is the new halftone background, which sitting on my desk on the like craft mat, you can't see it, but you can see like when it's stamped. And also there's a blog hop going on. I'll get more into that later. But you'll see other examples using this, and it gives a much better idea. This is just a really neat background stamp that starts completely solid at the bottom, and then, you know, it fades into these dots. So you can see it here. And I stamped it onto the front of another white card base, this time using Simon Says Stamp Stone ink. I found, kind of went through my inks, and this one goes really nicely with the liquid platinum embossing powder. It's basically liquid platinum without the metallic. So I'd stamped that onto the card base, and I had done that my standard, like having the stamp face up like you'd seen, rather than using it in the platform, because I find especially ones like that have that large solid area on the bottom, I get better coverage and stamping, you know, going old school without any platform or position or anything like that. So I'd done that, and then for the sentiment for the second card, I stamped that Thinking of You sentiment onto some dark gray cardstock. This is some slate gray cardstock from Simon, and I used the liquid platinum embossing powder again. I was going to use black, but I thought that would be a little too intense. I kind of really liked how the liquid platinum and the stone ink and just these more like muted colors. So I heat embossed that, and then I die cut that with Simon's sentiment label dies. And then this card, again, still very simple. No coloring involved, but, you know, it's a step up from the first card, which is very basic. And then this was kind of an accident. I wanted to add one more thing to this card, and I was going to do, you know, just an embossed strip of paper. But then my brain started whirling, and I went through all my glitter cardstock, and nothing was working. Silver's too bright. Any other color wasn't going to work. So I took a gamble and I took this scrap. This is Simon's white glitter cardstock. And I'm literally just blending that stone ink onto it with a blending brush. This is a dye ink, but Simon's dye inks are archival. So it just seemed to, this just worked. First attempt, I can't say this will work with every single color of ink. I can't say this will work with every dye ink. My theory would be most dye inks would smear, like it would just never dry. But this did, it worked. So it just kind of tinted the glitter paper more to that more muted sort of gray shade, and it was perfect. And I was super proud of myself. But if it hadn't worked, I just wouldn't have included it in the video. So it did work. So I just sponged that ink on. I used my heat tool just to kind of dry it, and it wasn't smearing or anything, so it worked. And I just trimmed down that little scrap so it was just a nice little strip. And then to adhere it to the back of the card front panel, I just used some score tape, because when you want to adhere the glitter side of glitter paper, you want something strong, because that's, you know, a thing with glitter paper. So I used the score tape and then I just adhered it. So just a nice little border of it sticking out past the main image here. So I trimmed off the excess with my scissors. And then to adhere this to my card base, I'm just going to use some Simon's Stamp Big Mama foam tape, which is thinner than the standard foam tape. So again, it just gives it that little bit of dimension without being like really popped up. So after I got my foam tape on the back, peeled off the backing, I'm going to line this up on my card, and there you can really see that half-tone background and what it looks like. I really wanted to stamp this in like a really bright color, but I was controlling myself and keeping things a lot more muted. It was fun doing something a little bit different again. So for the sentiment, I just used more of that score tape and then a little bit more of that foam tape just to adhere it into place. And then I'm just going to use my scissors to trim off the excess. And that's going to finish card number 2. So that's, you know, I've got the very basic, simple, clean card 1. Card 2, stepped it up a little bit. And then for card 3, I'm just going to do some simple watercoloring. Now, even though this is 3 levels, you could take it further. You could go to level 4, level 5, like whatever you wanted. You could do, you know, no line coloring and trim things out and do paper piecing and layering. Like there's always ways to add more, to put more in, and there's definitely nothing wrong with that. I stopped here because this was all I had the time and patience for. But if I was going to go like further, I would, you know, like you could die cut things. And like I said, you could do the no line coloring, which I rarely do because I just don't have the patience for it. I like heat embossing my images and then keeping the watercolor simple and somewhat messy, which is what I did here. For the main parts of it, the skin and the cat and her hair, I kept fairly contained. But once I started like getting further out, it's just my tendencies. Plus I'm heavy-handed with everything and I make a mess. So it's easier to do messy watercolor now because then it's like, yeah, this was all intentional. So for the actual watercoloring, I did speed this up quite a bit because I didn't do anything special. I used 2 little sets of Prima watercolors. I used the Complexions for the skin and hair and yeah, just for the skin and hair. The cat, I used the new Pastel Dreams that I just got my hands on. So I used that, and then I used the Pastel Dreams for her little shirt and the little like berries framing this image. So I was just going in, did the watercolor, let it completely dry. You always want to make sure it is dry before running it through a die cut machine or anything, because if it's still wet, it's gonna like get ruined. So after it was completely dry, I die cut it with the largest of the Simon wonky rectangles. And then to give the card a little something, I didn't want the card base to be completely white, but I didn't have a cardstock that went with this color. So keeping things simple, I actually just sponged that stone ink onto my card base using that same little brush. I could have used a larger blending brush and it would have gone faster. Of course, I speed this up in editing, but this only took a couple minutes because I only needed that little perimeter of the card base with the ink, because you're not going to see any of the center areas. So I just sponged that on with the blending brush, and then to adhere my card front, my watercolor panel, I'm just using the score tape again because it was sitting here and it's convenient, and peel off that backing, and I'm going to adhere that to my card base. And I decided not to add a sentiment or anything and just leave it as that. But like I said, you could definitely step it up, add heat embossed or a die cut sentiment and all that kind of stuff. But this is just 3 fairly simple ways to, you know, step up your cards. So that finishes off my video for today. Oh, and all of them for the inside, I just stamped that main image with that same stone ink on the inside of all 3 cards, just to kind of tie it all together and finish them off. So that was my cards for today. Like I said, this is part of a blog hop for the new release. I will have info about that in my blog post, so you can check that out below, along with the supply list and links to everything I used. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!